Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. 3x5 cards on your table. Write your questions and pass them forward during the question and answer session. For those of you who are watching us online, post your question in the chat. It will be captured by Lily, who will write the question on the card. So we want to make sure we get your online questions as well. For those in the room, logistics, bathroom, back of the room to the right. And hospitality, our thanks to the Mattapoisett Congregational Church for hosting this event. Pastor Michael, thank you. And to your crew for all your good stuff. A couple of words about the Reverend Peter Miano. Peter is the founder and executive director for the Society for Biblical Studies. Peter Miano is an elder and full member in the New England Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. Educated in missiology and biblical studies and experienced as a missionary and teacher in the Holy Land, Reverend Miano pioneered the unique blend of mission experience and biblical studies that is offered by the Society for Biblical Studies to participants. He has earned advanced degrees in New Testament and missiology at Union Theological Seminary in New York, a Master of Divinity, a Master of Theology from Harvard Divinity, and from Boston University School of Theology, he has a Master's in Sacred Theology. Reverend Miano also teaches courses in New Testament studies, biblical archaeology, biblical geography, and biblical history. I've known Peter going back 2013 on my first trip to the Holy Land. Had the pleasure of traveling with Peter. He is a brilliant biblical scholar. He knows the contemporary issues as well as the biblical background of the Holy Land extensively, and I know you will learn a thing or two from him today. So please welcome Reverend Peter Miano.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. I know you could have been spending a beautiful afternoon doing a lot of other things, so it makes me feel good to know that you decided to spend it here together this afternoon. I hope that being here together will foster some fortification to engage in some of the difficult issues that pertain to the question of Israel and Palestine. I happen to be, I promise that I'm going to be characteristically blunt and uncharacteristically brief. Away we go, sort of. I'm of the belief that the primary, or one of the principal enemies today is intimidation. Intimidation produces fear, and fear induces obedience. When intimidation is being used, as it is all around us today, it's for the purpose of suppressing ideas and thought and promoting proper conduct, whatever that happens to be considered. So what I want to do today is encourage us all to find an antidote for the intimidation, and I think that events like this are part of it, part of the antidote. There is no such thing as being in mission as a Lone Ranger. It's always a group event. It always involves relationship, and the relationship provides fortification, it provides support, and hopefully encourages engagement of issues which are difficult, especially when they're focused on issues of justice and peacemaking, and that's what it's all about in Israel and Palestine today. So thanks to Darren especially for the invitation to come and share the afternoon with all of you, and to the church for hosting the event and creating a space where we can come together as a community. Hopefully we'll go home with a lot of things to think about, and whatever we do, I hope we go home and stay connected, stay in partnership, and continue to work towards peace and justice in our community. So thanks again to all of you for coming, and thanks again, Karen, for inviting me to be here. There's no question that there are other ways to spend such a beautiful September afternoon. Fantastic weather today. There is a meaningless baseball game going on in Fenway Park this afternoon. If you're a Yankees fan, it's not so meaningless. There's football, there's apple picking, there's all kinds of things you can do. So to come here today and engage in this conversation is very important. And we're reminded all the time, every day, over and over again every day, of the hideous violence taking place in Palestine today. We see it on our TVs. We hear vapid excuses from all of our politicians. Israel has a right to defend itself. Has it occurred to you that, or let me ask you this, have you ever heard anybody say Israel does not have the right to defend itself? So why do we have to repeat over and over again something that no one is contesting? And make no mistake about it, this is a bipartisan, political, and moral fiasco. It's not a red-blue, Republican, Democratic issue. Did you know, or have you noticed, that almost the entire Massachusetts congressional delegation was on a Birthright for Politicians program in Israel in the last couple of weeks, paid for by the state of Israel? Almost no one didn't go. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. This is not a red-blue, Republican, Democratic issue. Every day we see the hand-wringing, if not the hearty endorsement of the violence from our political leaders. That violence is attended by a confused sea of rationales and hypotheses about its origins. Some say it's self-defense. This is not my idea of self-defense. Some say the problem is fundamentally religious, or a clash of civilizations. I don't know if you've ever heard of the podcast guy. His name is quite popular. His name is Sam Harris. He calls it a clash between savagery and civilization. Where's the savagery? Who owns the savagery? But what I want to do is persuade you that religion is nothing more than an unwilling recruit to this issue. It is not fundamentally a question of Islam and Judaism. If it were that easy, if it were that simple, it would have been solved a long time ago. And as far as a clash of civilizations, I don't see anything civilized about it. Instead, I'm going to try to persuade you that the conflict in Israel-Palestine today is originally, fundamentally, and persistently a nationalist conflict. And that it is best understood that way. Zionism is a purely nationalist ideology that does what all nationalist ideologies do. That is, it serves to legitimate and motivate the movement toward the establishment and perpetuation of a nation-state, in this case, Israel. And like all forms of nationalism, maybe this is the first thing I'll say that's a little bit controversial, but like all forms of nationalism, Zionism requires violence and deserves moral critique. That's true of any form of nationalism that you can think of, I think. Zionism is rooted in Christian theology, in Christian thinking. Back in the 17th century, in 1621, Christians were already talking about the ingathering of the Jewish people in their biblical homeland, which is Palestine. When Jewish people, late in the 19th century, started to develop a political program that came to be called Zionism, that aspired to a political entity, which eventually they settled on Palestine, it was inspired by purely secular Jewish people, not religious ones. Theodor Herzl, Name ring a bell for anybody? Widely regarded as the so-called father of Zionism, was himself a secular European Jew who was focused on the practicalities of establishing a state for Jews, and he was not motivated by faith. He was motivated rather by his dismay about Christian anti-Semitism. In the 19th century, all over Europe, and also in the United States, nationalism was taking root. And why not, Herzl theorized, appeal to the same rationalization to promote Jewish nationalism? Neither was Herzl a biblical fundamentalist. And for that matter, neither were any of the other founding and guiding fathers and mothers of the Zionist movement. These would include people like David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir, originally born in Eastern Europe, grew up in Milwaukee. She was an American. Chaim Weizmann and Abba Eban. None were religious. None were biblical fundamentalists. They were secular and progressive Jewish people, secular, progressive in terms of their own time. When Herzl wrote his book in 1897, he actually didn't call it the Jewish state. How many of you read The Jewish State, so-called Jewish State by Theodor Herzl? This is one of the founding blueprints for the Zionist movement. It's translated in English as the Jewish state. That's not a correct translation. Herzl, of course, didn't write in English, he wrote in German. Had he wanted to write a book with the title, The Jewish State, he would have called it Der Jüdischer Staat. But he called it Der Judenstaat. What's the difference? Der Jüdischer Staat means a Jewish state. Der Judenstaat means a state for Jews. Do you feel a little bit of a difference in the nuance of that? I mentioned this, and I stressed the secular origins of Jewish nationalism, Zionism as it's called, because when people express criticism of Zionism, a purely political ideology, or of the actions of the state of Israel, the Israeli government, that criticism is frequently and almost immediately condemned as anti-Semitic. Christians are, and should be, sensitive to concerns about anti-Semitism. Israel was established, to a large extent, in order to redress the experience of Jewish people in Europe in the 19th and 20th century. Obviously, the Holocaust is the emblematic example of that treatment. But that's just the end of the road. So Europeans knew, European Christians I should say, knew that they had a Jewish problem. That's their choice of words. Their solution was not to repair anti-Semitism in Europe, but to create a way to exit Jewish people from Europe to a new place in Palestine. They never really addressed the issue of Christian anti-Semitism. Anyway, as I said, Christians should be sensitive to concerns about anti-Semitism. There's no ceiling for the amount of sensitivity that we might have. Early Zionists knew that they could exploit that feeling. The book on this is by a Canadian Christian who's also a Zionist, professor at the University of Ottawa. It's in Ottawa. And the book, his name is Paul Merkley, and the book is called The Politics of Zionism. It came out in about 2007. You can read a lot more about this. Anyway, it was known that that moral sensitivity could be exploited for political support. The problem is, anti-Semitism is a very real and repugnant phenomenon. But when the charge of anti-Semitism is deployed so flippantly to insulate a nation state from natural moral critique, in that case, It's a cynical and specious accusation. But the accusation itself is enough to intimidate too many people into silence. Intimidation produces fear, and fear induces obedience. Consider this for a moment. If I were to criticize the state of Italy, which is 85% Catholic, would anybody call me anti-Christian? If I were to criticize the state of Greece, which is about 85% Orthodox, would anybody call me anti-Christian? The accusation of anti-Semitism is employed to blunt criticism. Why does critique of Israel, when it is engaged in savage destruction in Gaza, in full worldview, with the eager and bipartisan complicity of almost all of our elected officials, Christian and Jewish alike, an unlimited commitment of U.S. taxpayer dollars, somehow, how does that somehow end up being anti-Jewish? If you say, well, because Israel is a Jewish state, tell me, please, what specifically about Israel is Jewish? Is it the apartheid? Is it the ethnic cleansing? Is it what we see right in front of our eyes going on today in Gaza? That, to me, is not Jewish. Moreover, perhaps most paradoxically, you tell me, Zionism is still, even today, a primarily Christian phenomenon. Christian Zionists outnumber Jewish ones by at least 10 to 1 in this country. Worldwide, it's closer to 50 to 1. And I think you'll be happy to know I took out 2 paragraphs of this presentation. You can ask me about it later, but I didn't think we had to go through the details. Zionism is originally a Christian movement. It's supported overwhelmingly by Christians, and the number of Christians who populate the ranks of modern Zionists today outnumber Jewish Zionists at least 10 to 1 in the United States, and most likely 50 to 1 throughout the world, if we're estimating conservatively. I'd call that critique of Zionism a critique of other Christians. Let me ask you another question. You get a chance to ask some questions of your own, but I've got some for you. Who was the most influential American to express support face-to-face to the Israeli Prime Minister? His name is Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's called Bibi Netanyahu. Who was the most influential American to express support to him after the horrific events of the 7th of October? It was not Mike Huckabee. Does the name Mike Huckabee ring a bell to you guys? He's the current ambassador to Israel. Was not Mike, and he's a self-identifying Christian Zionist. It was Joe Biden. That's right. That's right. Within a couple of days, Joe Biden had flown to Tel Aviv, embraced Bibi Netanyahu in a warm bear hug, and he said, I don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. Now, Joe Biden is not a fundamentalist Christian Zionist. He's not a fundamentalist Catholic. He's a devout Catholic. He's not a fundamentalist. He's a progressive Christian, and he's a self-identifying Christian Zionist. Why wouldn't we call him a Christian Zionist? Consider some of the devout mainstream Christians who historically were full-throated Zionists. Does the name Reinhold Niebuhr mean anything to anybody?
Yep.
Krister Stendahl.
Yep. Seminary. Everybody went to seminary, right?
Yeah. Former Massachusetts Congressman, the late Robert Dryden. Remember him? He was an ordained priest. not a fundamentalist, progressive, also a Zionist. John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, she's a Methodist. She taught Sunday school in Methodist churches for years. Bill Clinton, on the night before Bill Clinton brought Yasser Arafat and Shimon Peres together on the White House lawn, he read the book of Joshua. That was his bedtime reading. More recently, the former Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, said in March 2025, "No one in Canada should ever be afraid to call himself a Zionist. I am a Zionist." So Zionists come from all bands of the political spectrum. It doesn't require biblical fundamentalism. I'm mentioning this because often when people think Christian Zionists, they think of a segment of the Christian evangelical population, which is biblically Zionist. See the establishment of the State of Israel somehow as the fulfillment of God's plan. God's plan understood in a very peculiar way, in my opinion, but that's how they see it. But you don't have to subscribe to that type of biblical interpretation in order to be a Zionist. Zionism is not a religious outlook, it's a nationalist ideology. A Zionist does not have to be Jewish, nor does a Zionist have to be a biblical fundamentalist. If the latter requirement, in order to be a Zionist, you have to be a biblical fundamentalist, Theodore Herzl would not qualify. The founding father of Jewish Zionism would not qualify. Neither would David Ben-Gurion, Golda Meir, any of the others that I mentioned, and even down to today. Bibi Netanyahu is not a biblical fundamentalist. He's barely religious. Zionism is the idea that there is a distinct Jewish people with a distinct cultural identity who, as a matter of political expedience, should be organized in their own distinct nation-state. And that this is often, if not always, regarded as not only a political necessity, but a moral imperative as well. It's a form of restitution. Zionism is a modern nationalist ideology. Nationalism itself, here's where things get interesting. Nationalism itself is a modern phenomenon. Until the 19th century, no one had ever heard of a nation state. The idea does not occur in the Bible, but appeal to the Bible is one way to legitimate Zionist nationalism. All nationalism requires is the invention of a national identity. When I point this out to people, anybody, whether they're my students, when we're travel programs, or anywhere else, anytime someone's forced to listen to you, as you're patiently doing now, how hideously destructive nationalism has been, and inevitably suggests that it is grotesquely obsolete. The first question I often hear is, what's the alternative? The short answer, there are many alternatives. But the inability to conceptualize the world organized in any other way than by nation states is symptomatic of the problem. A very, very peculiar transfiguration occurred in the political imagination in the 19th century. In 1815, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, no one at that time could imagine the world configured in anything but configured in nation states. By 1914, before the outbreak of World War I, nobody was able to conceptualize it any other way. That's a rather dramatic transformation from 1815 to 1914. The problem is this. All nationalism requires exclusivity. All exclusivity is divisive. It requires a me and a you, an us and a them, an in-group and an out-group. And all divisiveness is unstable, and political instability requires force to maintain equilibrium. The inherent instability of nationalism is precisely the problem. Over the past 120 years or so, over 200 million people have been killed in nationalist warfare. At no time in human history has killing been so popular, so systematic, and so scientific. You already know this, but call me quirky if you want. If that's progress, we need less of it. All forms of nationalism require violence to greater or lesser extents, and violence has been the distinguishing characteristic of nationalism since its inception. For the sake of clarity, allow me to suggest this definition. Nationalism is a political ideology that leads to the establishment of nation-states and then serves to legitimate them. Nationalism depends on the perception, almost always imaginary at first, that there is a distinct, recognizable people, usually characterized by a common language and common cultural features, and further, that the apparatus of the nation-state, including governing bodies, institutions of law, education, infrastructure, defense, and so on, are designed to cultivate a national identity where it did not previously occur. In addition, and finally, and maybe the most important development with the introduction of nationalism, is that nation-states are defined by boundaries. Prior to this, groupings of people, political entities, were defined by frontiers. What's the difference? A frontier is characterized by the absence of a population. A border is written on a map, regardless, with no regard for the populations. Very, very important distinction. Wouldn't surprise me if you were a bit skeptical about what you're hearing so far today. But consider that the people that are referred to in the United States Constitution were not thought of as Americans. None of the signers of the U.S. Constitution had an idea of an American people. The people that they were signing on behalf of were New Yorkers, or Virginians, or Pennsylvanians. They did not have the concept of an American people at that time. That came later. And by the same token, the populations that would be organized into nation-states in Europe during the 19th century and the 20th century did not originally see themselves as French or German or Italian or Spanish. And even today, many of those within the nation-states identify as, say, Basque instead of Spanish, as Napolitano or Siciliano instead of Italian. Camillo Benson, the very first Prime Minister of Italy, stated at the occasion of the celebration of Italian unification in 1871, "We have created Italy. Now we have to create the Italian people." That was a project, and it's not complete. I stress this because nationalism has been as an unmitigated disaster for humanity. I stress this because there is no critique of Zionism that is not also a critique of nationalism. And the sooner it morphs into something else, the sooner we will be rid of the plague. The issue we are considering today is not any one parochial form of nationalism. It's popular these days, for example, to shine the moral light on Christian nationalism. Who's heard of Christian nationalism? It's a problem. And it deserves all the moral opprobrium we can give it. But the problem is not merely Christian nationalism or Zionist nationalism, but nationalism itself. To be blunt, I promise, to be blunt, nationalism is a perverse anachronism. It's a stench in the nostrils of God. There is virtually no morally repugnant conduct undertaken by Israel in Gaza today, or at any other time since 1948, that hasn't first occurred in almost every nationalist struggle on the planet. All of what we are witnessing today also occurred on the American frontier. among other places. Starvation as a tool to force populations into subjugation. That's how the indigenous populations on the American prairie were finally defeated. The native populations were superior militarily to the arriving colonists. They were never really defeated on the battlefield decisively, but starvation did. Forced relocation. You've heard about the Trail of Tears, the Long Walk, segregation of entire populations into ghettos. You've heard about Bantustan's in South Africa. What about our reservations? Why do I emphasize this? Because as much of a moral imperative it is to critique and condemn the atrocities that have been perpetrated in the course of advancing the Zionist nationalist agenda, it is just important to do so. Not as though it is an evil that resides outside ourselves, but rather as an evil that we too have participated in and continue to participate in. This is fundamental, and for this reason, someone once said, take the log out of your own eye so you can see to take the splinter out of another's eye. Very few topics generate the fervent debate, arouse passions, and evoke confusion like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is because it veers into volatile areas like politics and religion, personal faith, interpretation of scripture, personal loyalties, friendships, moral convictions, and deeply held political opinions overlap and collide in a confused sea of facts, perceptions of facts, images, and realities. Notwithstanding these treacherous emotional waters, conscientious American Christians, like all of you here today, have no choice but to attempt to navigate them, because our churches, our government, are all deeply complicit in the sadness and suffering of the people in Israel and Palestine. Thank you for listening.
We'll give you a moment to stretch your legs, grab some snacks, write your questions, then we'll gather them up. And then for those that are watching us online, please put in the chat a question you might have and give us a couple of minutes to get them all together, and then Peter will come back and answer your questions.
I was expecting more.
So I was very good. I get paid for everything.
Okay. That would do. Yeah. All right.
Questions out there? Online audience is being at the high school.
So, and we were successful.
You're on. So, see how long the questions
Are we on right now? Are we on or off?
Everybody ready? You guys ready to reconvene? And away we go. There were 3 written questions. I'm happy to take questions that are not written either, but up to 3, I can answer one of them. The other one I'll make up the answers to. And this one is, if not nationalisms, what is the vehicle for support of the needy and infrastructure? Good question. I think the issue, though, is to recognize, the answer is to recognize that before there was nationalism, before states were organized into nation states as they are now, there was support for the needy. There was infrastructure. Rome is not a nation state, and it had a vast infrastructure which included, until quite recently, this sort of penetration of national boundaries and the ceding of national power to transnational or multinational entities like the European Union, like NAFTA, like trade agreements of various kinds. Every time there is there are agreements like that between sovereign nation states, I think is the future. More of I hate to use the word globalization because it has the initial experiment with globalization was done, in my opinion, in such a clumsy way that it has a bad name now. But transnational systems, confederations of states, in which the people that are resident have the same prerogatives, the same privileges, the same access to benefits. That's where I think things are going. What happened with the experiment with the EU and globalizing economic systems is that a lot of people were left out. A lot of people were left as flotsam and jetsam in the wake of these actions. And those people are pushing back now. I think what we're seeing in the United States today and other countries is a pushback against globalization and a heightened sense of nationalism, which is carrying the day at the moment. Hopefully it's not permanent. Does that answer the question? The support still comes. Feeding people always occurs with or without a nation state. And there are other mechanisms to do it. Did you have a...
Yeah, I buy a lot of what you're saying in terms of understanding the differentiation between nationalism and Zionism and the religions. What I'm kind of lost here is the definition of nationalism versus statehood and the affiliation that people have for a state. Because we've always had, as human groups, some kind of governmental structure with defined bodies. We've always had a lot of the characteristics you call nationalism, so I'm losing the distinction because it's just, to me, it's just a continuation of the process of the definition, a little bit more.
Okay. Your name, please?
It's Richard.
Richard is asking, I'll try to repeat the question for everybody's benefit, and correct me if I if I don't understand the question. What's really different about nationalism as opposed to what had occurred before that? Because there have been structures of administration, structures of more or less domination from time to time. What's distinctive about nationalism as opposed to its predecessor? Is that something like what you're asking? The idea of nation states is this, there are a couple of things that are distinctive. One is this idea that the nation state corresponds to a distinct ethnic group. That is a new phenomenon. There have been groups before, but the idea that the group should have, as a matter of practicality or political expedience or political necessity, state apparatus corresponding to that ethnic group is a whole new thing. There was state, take for example the Roman Empire. There was state apparatus, the infrastructure, the administration, the military system. These things were massive. And they were more or less, not, let me put it this way, they were no more brutal than what we're experiencing now. So these things, they had this apparatus, they had this capability. They had the capability so much that people were literally fighting to get into the Roman Empire. But the Roman Empire, the citizenship, was not a function of an ethnic group. You didn't have to be a Latin-speaking person. You didn't have to be born in the Italian peninsula, let's say, to be a Roman. Roman meant something else, and anybody could be it. And they figured out it was advantageous to the administration and the overall management of the system, I guess you could say, to incorporate more and more people. So as the frontiers expanded, the people that found themselves under Roman jurisdiction or Roman domination, however you want to put it, were not left without privileges. In fact, the genius of the system was that they were incorporated into it. They had a sort of, what's the word, an on-ramp to the benefits of society. So the idea of the state apparatus being specifically for a particular group is one of the new things. This groupness, this idea of ethnic identity, is itself a very interesting phenomenon and far more ambiguous than most of us realize. There's a lot of good literature on this. But take, for example, the experience of modern Israel and modern Palestine, if you will. The problem is not that there's a state institution. The problem is that there's a state institution that privileges one particular group of people that is alleged to have an ethnic identity, a unique ethnic identity. It's not, they know, everybody in Israel knows that there are vast differences ethnically and linguistically among everybody who calls themselves a Jewish citizen of Israel. 70% of the people of the state, 70% of the Jewish population of Israel, can you hear me if I move away? Okay.
Can you just grab the mic and walk with it?
Then I don't have my hands. 70% of the population in Israel proper, now Israel proper is a section of Israel-Palestine. 70% of the Jewish population in internationally recognized Israel are Arab, descendants of Arab people. 70%. Here in the United States, when you have Jewish friends and neighbors, co-workers and so forth, almost all of them would occupy a minority position in Israeli Jewish society if they were to go there. They are called Ashkenazim. They're from Eastern Europe. They're from Europe, maybe Australia, those kind of places. But Ashkenazim are Western-oriented. Theodor Herzl was a European Jewish person educated in the West, the Enlightenment, all this kind of stuff. And they are the minority in modern Israel today. About 30% of the Jewish population, 70%. Their native language, if not they themselves, then their mothers and fathers, maybe their grandparents, is Arabic. So the point I'm making is this idea of a neat and tidy ethnic identity is a fiction. Israel illustrates it very well. It's also a fiction here. What's the ethnic identity of Americans? We're a salad bowl. At best, we're a salad bowl. The bifurcations and the divisions are becoming more and more pronounced, mostly along ideological lines, though. So the point is that this idea of state apparatus for a particular ethnic, or people that have a particular ethnic identity, is very, very nebulous. It's hard to define. It's problematic. It's especially problematic when the people for whom the state apparatus is designed are not a majority of the population. We get away with it more or less in the United States because our borders are so vast, and we don't always come in contact with people that are not sharing in the fruits of society. In Israel, it's not like that. You can't, Israel is this geographical landmass of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it's about the same population, about 10 or 12 million people. You can't have this small of a landmass where about 52%, well, more correctly, say 80%, dominates 20%. Of the territory that Israel itself dominates, the other part of that territory, between the river and the sea, if the Jewish population in that area is a majority, it's a very slight. And some people are speculating already that in that territory between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, there's a majority of non-Muslim people, non-Jewish people. They're mostly Muslims, sometimes Christian. You can't have a nation state for a minority of people without having the dominant, the majority of the people. Nobody loses. They're not going to sit there and accept that. They're not going to accept a subordinate secondary position in this society that is not for them. Nobody does that. So that idea of ethnic identity is something that is interesting and a little bit problematic. So that, did I answer that?
Yeah, I was not getting your, it makes sense that you're combining a statehood with an ethnicity.
Yeah,
that
and then superimpose on top of that this idea of lines, borders. With our students when we're traveling, we're the Society for Biblical Studies as an educational organization, which does teaching through travel. So when we're having our groups of 20, 30, 40, 60, whatever they happen to be, and we're going along, everybody has a map of the Mediterranean or a map of the Middle East that dates to before the 20th century. Then they have one that dates to after the 20th century or more recently. And the difference is that one has no boundaries, the other has boundaries. And those boundaries are problematic because they're arbitrary. The map of the modern Middle East was not drawn by the people of the Middle East themselves. There's a great book by retired BU professor David Franken called A Peace to End All Peace. You know, he's making a play on the war to end all war thing. Basically what he's saying is that the superimposition of national boundaries arbitrarily by British and French colonial officers in 1920 is the fundamental problem. Because the boundaries themselves literally go through neighborhoods. They divide families from one another. The boundaries are drawn on a map with a ruler and a protractor. Completely arbitrary. Very few, there's only 2 countries in the modern Middle East that determine their own boundaries. You want to guess who they are?
Oman?
Which?
Oman?
No, not Oman. Oman, you said, right?
Yeah.
No. No. Iran and Turkey. Iran and Turkey determine their own boundaries. All the other ones, Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, all those places were created in 1920. And there was no poll, there was no canvassing of the populations. Do you want this or not? It was just done. That's a problem. So that idea of boundaries is a real issue if the boundaries are not sensitively drawn. Okay, there's another question here. With nation states being the seeming culmination of nationalism, how have nationalist impulses been defeated without the overthrow of the state? Well, sometimes, that's a good question, sometimes the state is overthrown, more often than not in our lifetimes, by other competing nationalist regimes. So the nationalist impulse is not replaced by a non-nationalist. It's just a different power group that takes the reign. And usually it's done violently. How do we do it today? How could it be done today? Through conciliation, through representative participation of the populations. This is the problem with Israel and Palestine today. You know, everybody remembers Jimmy Carter. He got a Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, for the Camp David Accords in 1980. The Camp David Accords gave absolutely no preference to the Palestinians. So they were not even consulted in the process. Why would anybody expect them to acquiesce in that? So, you know, you can make some decisions. You have to do it without, hopefully you can do it without violence. There are ways to do that. Our default way is violence. Everybody learns it growing up. You know, violence is the answer. But it doesn't have to be that way. But it can't be without consulting the people that live in the territory that is being affected. That's just it's going nowhere. There's another question here. Prior to the fall of the USSR, support for Israel by the West was predominantly geopolitical in nature. Do you see Christian Zionism in its current form as a replacement for the us in the us then West versus East conflict of the Cold War? And this is Bruce Scherer asking the question. I see Christian Zionism as an alternative form of nationalism. But I don't see the primary impetus or support for the establishment of the State of Israel by Western countries as a primarily East-West, US, USSR thing. I think it had a lot more to do with two things. For one thing, it had a lot to do with the reality of anti-Semitism in Europe. They called it their Jewish problem. And they knew that there was a political issue going on here. They also knew that everybody around them was getting organized into nation states. The natural thing in their imagination was to create one for the Jewish people. Well, that's fine. That's so far so good. But what about when that gets superimposed in a population which is mostly not Jewish? And there was no consultative process with the indigenous populations in Palestine, which was overwhelmingly Palestinian after 1948 when Israel came into being. So I think there was a practical problem. They knew they had there had already been many horrendous, even without the Holocaust. The experience of Jews in Christian Europe was as a second-class, subdominant group dominated by Christians. One of the exceptions to that, guess, Germany. It's one of the only places in Europe where Jewish people identified as Germans before they identified as Jews. It's kind of an interesting irony. But they knew that there was an issue with the treatment of Jews in dominant non-Jewish countries. And creating a state for Jews seemed to be a reasonable solution. In that context, it was. This is the way all ethnic competition was being resolved at the time. And it had always involved transfer of populations. It always involved creating partitioning of populations. This is what they thought. This is what they did. When India fell apart into India and Pakistan, there was a huge transfer of population from India to Pakistan and vice versa. At the end of the Turkish War of Independence, what they call it, when the Turkish state came into being, the problem was partially solved. It was a military issue first. At the consummation, they resolved the question of which ethnic group was going to be in what became the Republic of Turkey by having a massive population transfer. Does the name Mustafa Kemal Ataturk ring a bell? He was born in what is today Greece. Venizelos Eleftheriou, what's his name? The Greek nationalist, his name is escaping me. He was born in what's now Turkey. So there was a massive transfer of populations. A total of 3 million people were forced to leave, if you were Christian, Orthodox, you were forced to leave what became Turkey and go to what's now Greece, and vice versa. This is just the way they did it. And they thought that that was, you know, the disruption for the people that had to do that is enormous.
Who was the genocide?
That's the Armenian. Was that?
That's what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, no, I'm not talking about that. That's a whole separate thing. The Armenian genocide, this is the way, when World War I started, the population inside of what became Turkey, at that time it was the Ottoman Empire, was about 15% Turkish speaking. 8 years later, when the Turkish Republic was founded, it was 75% Turkish speaking, which means that 85% that had been non-Turkish speaking, they were Armenians, they were Greeks, there were other ethnic groups as well, they were expelled, and many of them were killed. The Armenian genocide occurred in that context. There were several waves of genocide against the Armenians. The issue always was, they're not us. They don't belong here. This is for Turkish-speaking people. Okay, those.
We have one question online. So that the theory seems sound, but what action can we take, especially in congregations which are tiptoeing around the situation in Gaza for fear of being called anti-Semitic?
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's how I started the conversation, is the exploitation of our fear of being called anti-Semitic. Court offered a good suggestion. I made the comment, intimidation creates fear, fear induces obedience. Court suggested fear induces paralysis. So fear induces obedience and paralysis. One of the things you can do is come together in groups like this. This is a safe space. You have to have safe spaces, and you have to do it collectively. Voting is very important, but having these kind of safe places is really important too. And personally, now that I introduced a subject that I wanted to make anyway today, you don't have to vote for the people that they tell you are available to vote for. It's not a binary choice. It's not Democrat or Republican. In this issue and on a lot of issues, it doesn't make any difference. The ones that went on the Birthright for Politicians program from the Massachusetts, they're both. So, you know, you can write in people. And actually, in Massachusetts, you have the advantage, or I'm betraying a little of my own, not that I've been coy or covered, I don't think I'm tippy-toeing around things, but in Massachusetts, you can vote for somebody who's not on the ballot, and still you know who's going to win. Who's going to win?
Blue. We're totally blue.
Totally blue, right?
We're the only state in the union that's so blue.
It's, you know, I used to live in Massachusetts. I used to vote in Massachusetts, and I was always writing in a name for years. I voted for Alfred E. Newman. But the point is, I could vote for the man on the moon, and it wasn't going to matter, because Hillary was going to win here, Bill Clinton was going to win here, and you know, you can make a statement with your votes, and not necessarily, it's not the case that a vote for Alfred E. Newman is a vote for Donald Trump, or that's not the case. They're telling you that. John Fetterman says that, so that you get afraid of exercising your own thought process. He's trying to instill fear. That's what they're doing. So anyway, it's kind of an advantage when you live in a state like this. You can express your dissatisfaction if you have it. I personally am very dissatisfied with the choices. Even I now vote in Maine. I still didn't get better just because I voted to Maine, or moved to Maine. Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for coming, folks. Did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry. We have time for it?
Yeah.
I was kind of struck by, like, you're talking about nationalism creating in-groups and out-groups. You know, when does it get, and then we talk about apartheid states, and kind of, is that a spectrum, or like how do you delineate between nationalism and apartheid, and what is your kind of working definition of?
That's a good question. So nationalism occurs in one of two kinds, and everywhere it is, it occurs in one of two kinds, forms. One is based on the principle, it's called jus sanguina. It means the law of the bloodline. The other is what's called jus soli, the law of the soil. In the former, which is what happens in Israel, and actually, by the way, what happened in Nazi Germany, the idea of identity, who belonged and who did not, was based on your bloodline. Here, theoretically, or I guess it's being challenged now, but here, it's based on where you're born. If you're born in the United States, you're a U.S. citizen, regardless of your ethnic heritage, your religious affiliation. Theoretically, that's the way it's supposed to work. That's not the way it is in Israel today. If you're a Palestinian and born in Israel, you don't have the same prerogatives. You don't have the same status of citizenship because you don't have the bloodline. And bloodline is a pretty tricky thing too. So there are different varieties of nationalism, and there is a continuum. Some forms of nationalism are highly exclusive and enforce the exclusivity with violence, and some don't have to do that. Apartheid was a very strict imposition of privilege based on a perception of race. So sometimes it happens that way, and the more strict, the more exclusive, the more forcefully the exclusivity is imposed, the greater the likelihood is that there's going to be instability and resistance. There's not, in the history of the world, there's not any place where subjugated people have acquiesced in their own subjugation. It doesn't happen. You can get away with it if you have enough force. You can maintain the illusion of it, but not for long, not forever. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Thanks for, Court.
Yeah, can
Court has a little announcement that he'd like to make.
actually, a couple things, you may not know, you're already doing stuff.
Please go to the.
Oh, Mike. The good old Mike. You may not know this, but there's a delegation from SNUG going to Palestine next month, going to Tai Bay, where so many Christian sites have been destroyed and attacked by settlers. There is a task team in your conference. Now, it's new, so you may not have heard about it. We'll be online next month. We just gave all our info to Noah. And I think it's loosely called the Palestine Solidarity Action Team. And got like 20 people on this team. It's flying. John actually drove out. He's on that same squad. And we have sending a delegation of 4 folks from our conference as part of something that we're calling Come and See, Go and Tell. Somebody asked about how many Israelis are Christian over here on the side. 85% of Christians in the Holy Land are Palestinian. And they're heartbroken at the lack of response from their Christian siblings here, and how we've either been compliant, complicit, or outright supported the genocide being perpetrated against them. So our task team, the first thing we did was we had a priest from Tai Bay. Now, you might not have heard of Tai Bay. In the Bible, in the Gospel according to John, it's called Ephraim. It's the last place Jesus hung out after he raised Lazarus. That was tiring. That was exhausting. He went, had a few figs, chilled out. They've got some good wine up there too. Prayed in some olive groves. And then he went to Jerusalem for the last time to be crucified. He hung out in this village that your conference is sending a delegation to hang out with. So when we come back, we're going to do town halls and stuff. If you want to find out more about that task team, join us. We've got a lot of cool things coming up for Advent that will be done through the conference. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is something Peter mentioned about, and the online question about what do we do? What can we do? That intimidation drives us to paralysis. And as I look out, I see a lot of people my age and older, and I think a lot of us don't even really know what's happening as far as the genocide. And when I go to groups that talk about Palestine, it's all kids under 35. Half of our task planning team, they're all under 30. And they're watching these kids die every day. And a lot of us, we aren't seeing that, so we don't get why they're reacting the way they are. So this Church at the Crossroads is a conference that happened a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to have one in New England. Part of that, Peter was mentioning that intimidation driving us into paralysis. Our task team will be having something called